Hey, listeners, just a quick note that our host, Dave Feinlieb, will be speaking this Thursday at Bazaar Voice Summit 2025. He'll be joining a panel including Joe Callahan, VP of Client Strategy and Insights at Bazaar Voice, and Jeff Malmed, Global Head of Commerce Media at Mindshare, for a panel discussion titled Retail Media Networks Reimagined, The Power of a Full Funnel Content Strategy. It'll be taking place at 11:20 a.m. Central Time. They'll be diving into the latest trends in retail media, content automation, and digital shelf strategy, exploring how brands can stay ahead in an increasingly competitive landscape. If you're attending, be sure to catch the panel. And if you haven't signed up yet, you can reserve your spot now at Bazaar Voice. That's BAZAAR voice.com/summit-2025. Now on with the show. Welcome to Beyond the Shelf with Dave Feinlieb. This show is an open exploration of the people and process behind e-commerce. Through conversations with innovators in the space, we learn the stories of these leaders and their strategies for e-commerce success. We publish new episodes every Tuesday morning, so be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And now, here's your host, Dave Feinlieb.
You might not realize it, but today's podcast wouldn't be possible without the contributions of our guest. Let me explain. My guest today is Jyoti Malik, the Senior Director of eCommerce at Belkin, the company behind hundreds of essential charging devices that keep our phones and our lives running smoothly. With over 20 years of experience, 2 impressive business degrees, and a wealth of insights into the world of e-commerce, it's an honor to welcome Jyoti Malik. Jyoti, welcome to Beyond the Shelf.
Thank you, Dave. Great to be here.
Now, you've worked with some of the biggest names in technology, from IBM to Microsoft and Amazon, and focused on e-commerce when it was just a budding business. What can you tell us about the early days of e-commerce, say 2010, 2012, when things were more nascent than they are now?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I recall most of the conversations with the clients, I was in consulting at the time, were about figuring out this omni-channel strategy. And then what does it take to deliver a seamless customer experience across physical and digital touch points? I remember BOPIS was something that was very new at the time.
Right.
As a conversation, because for the retail clients, it was a lot about just how do they integrate this online thing with what they already have, which is their physical presence. And then consumer goods clients were trying to figure out, what does this mean for how they plan their own strategy? So it was very much, we don't know this, we have to figure this out. And so that was kind of the initial days. And then e-commerce standalone wasn't that big of a conversation. And then over time, e-commerce has come up, really came to be on its own as its share of sales has grown over the years. And then there's a whole host of obviously providers and communities and events and all the conversations that are solely focused on digital. And in fact, even the buzzwords, have sort of shifted. There was multi-channel for a long time. There was omni-channel, and there was one digital that you may have heard here and there. And then e-commerce evolved to kind of its present day nomenclature. I think earlier, sometimes it was referred to as internet retail or online retail. And then of course, there's continuous evolution. I was reading this term, generative engine optimization, GEO, which is the kind of the evolution of SEO. So it's always shifting. Yeah.
What a great perspective. And on that note, I remember at my previous company, Content Analytics, being in a meeting with a large CPG, and this was back in the day, and they said, oh yeah, that e-commerce thing, we should stay in touch on that. We think it could be interesting. And now, of course, you go into that same meeting and it's all, as you said, e-com, it's omni, all those things. But if you had to think about maybe a couple of the biggest changes, what's different now than when the space was starting out?
I think, there's a few different things. I think when the space was starting out, there was a lot about kind of long-term planning. I remember most of my conversations about like build out a 3-year plan and a business case and things like that. Like, should we start investing? What are the big areas we need to invest in?
Right.
And now, obviously, all that is past. Everyone's got their kind of their setup, and the conversations, especially in the last couple of years, I think, as we are talking amongst ourselves, it's a lot more about efficiency. It's a lot more about profitability and how do we use data and how do we manage the equation across channels, specifically with some marketplaces dynamics that kind of necessitate that. So it's very much the business is on and running, and now it's really about kind of taking it to the next level. Versus earlier, it was more about exploration and should we do it, should we not do it? Where does it fit with the overall priorities? I think that's no longer a question. Yeah.
Now, we talked about a few buzzwords. Today, we're hearing, I think, about omni is really one of the big ones. Anything else our listeners should be thinking about when it comes to terms and terminology?
Well, I'm really curious about this GEO. And the reason being, I think it's got to do with kind of this, it's an implication of this AI, right? Like how retailers are incorporating AI into their platforms. And that has implications for how we need to adapt content now to have a dialogue with the customer through this AI engine on the retailer's platform. So it changes that you need to be understood by the AI agent before you get in front of the customer, and the customer is also engaging with this AI assistant, asking questions about the brand or the products. So that one, when I read it first a couple of weeks ago, actually, I was like, okay, that makes sense. And there's a whole host of learning to be had around that, because it's got to do with understanding exactly how the capabilities are evolving within the platforms, and then what does it mean for the brands, and lots of test and learn and experimentation opportunities here.
Yeah, so well put. Now, you've been at Belkin for going on 6 months now, and tell us a little about that. And, that was more of an in-store purchase historically, but to your earlier point, a lot of that's really moving online now.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think as I'm learning more and more about the categories and kind of the different channels and the growth and the share and where the TAM is, all of that. I mean, a lot of electronics, I think there's a large share of electronics being sold online today. Despite being a relatively more considered purchase, it's really about, platforms like Amazon have enabled. You can educate the customer through the content, make the purchase relatively risk-free, easy returns. There is that trust that the consumers have. So coming back to the chargers and other categories, I think a lot of these fundamentals remain the same in terms of how do we connect with the customer, how do we explain the product to the customer in a manner that it sort of stands out amongst all the different kind of options that the consumer may have, because there's a plethora of options as far as these categories are concerned. And that's really the work to be done, that how do you get to the customer easily? How do you get visible? And then once you've got the eye of the customer, how do you make it easy for them to determine, does the product fit their need, the product they are looking at? And if not, like you recommend them additional products, etc., and then make it easy for them to purchase, as well as ensure that there is a post-purchase experience there, be it through product registrations, warranties, and things like that.
It's a great perspective. And I think also this idea that you have this trusted relationship with the shopper is really important, something we often lose sight of. So that's a great item to bring up. Now, I've got my cables, I've got my charging pads now, I've got all kinds of gear. What should we be thinking about? What's on the horizon? I know you can't tell us about any products that are yet to be released, but anything fun and interesting in terms of these stands and pads and cables that we might be hoping for in the next few years?
I think in general, I would think it more from a consumer perspective, because every brand is sort of trying to understand what the customer is looking for and building a strategy around that, right? So I think from a consumer standpoint, I think what's next is more like continued greater degree of flexibility and application around different use cases, something you can use at home, easily take it to travel, to office, to the gym.
Yeah.
And that flexibility is really important, and like that multi-use versus having one particular device for every single purpose. And T2 is the new standard as far as charging is concerned. So as more device manufacturers enable that wireless charging, obviously it has an impact on the charging accessories space as well. And we'd see it become, I see it becoming more of a normal to have a set of kind of wireless portable chargers, and they work with the host of devices a consumer has, from phones to earbuds to watches to laptop. Everyone has like a couple different electronics that need the charging capability at this point. So it's really about adapting to how the consumer is shifting from individual or even to kind of like families.
You read my mind. I was just going to mention, if I look at at our family, we've got all kinds of different travel gear and everything you need in order to do these activities together. So I think there's tons of great products and capabilities we're going to see. I'm waiting for AI powered devices and chargers and cables that can figure out what my travel plans are and then plan ahead for me. So we'll see if those are coming. Now, AI is a topic that you mentioned earlier. Where do you see that playing in this space when it comes to a lot of these capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, I think for e-commerce, as I said, like from a use case perspective, I think it's important to study how the retailers and are incorporating AI into the platform, how we can incorporate AI into our owned and operated channels, right? What does it mean? Do we have like conversational assistance with the consumers? How do we help them navigate to what they need? Help them with education, etc. And what are those use cases? And then on the other side, it's about then, can you use AI to scale your content creation, for example? And kind of how do you use AI to kind of quickly test and change, which should be easier if it's, there's more automation, more ability to kind of just create content or like be it imagery or videos or text using these AI capabilities and quickly switching them around. So it helps kind of scale that faster. I think those are some of the more immediate top of mind kind of use cases, some things that already we are seeing happening and being leveraged. And then, of course, I'm sure there's more in the future.
I love it. So much to come. Now, how are you using, we talked about AI, but we also have data. How does that come into play when you're thinking about your day-to-day work and kind of keeping the shopper engaged with the product set?
I think it's very important to link back the insights to kind of tangible actions. So there's a ton of data with e-commerce, and there's different kinds of data. You've got your sales data, your marketing data, operations data, you've got consumer engagement data, your CRM, like you've got all sorts of data. But how do you meaningfully connect these data sets to look at the holistic picture and then make sure that you're actually using those insights to inform your strategy and like how we run the day-to-day business, how we engage with the consumers, as well as the long-term planning? Like, for example, take the sales, commerce funnel, profitability, etc. in a particular channel, let's say. Use it to determine your assortment strategy. How do you continuously rationalize your catalog? I mean, being in e-commerce, it's easy to get lost in the trap, trying to offer everything because there's no limitation of shelf space. But is it really the right thing to do? So really understanding what the consumer is looking for, really to the extent the data is available, mining for those insights, and then combining that with kind of the commercial factors to provide the right kind of product to the consumer is one important way to use data.
Did you get comfortable and learn about using data as part of your day-to-day work through your business degree? Did it always come naturally? Or how did you incorporate this into the work that you do?
So I would say it's a combination. It's like things over time. I mean, obviously, business school,
Yeah.
you had the analytics and decision modeling classes, which obviously helped a lot. And then a lot of my work in consulting was also, besides multi-channel strategy, it was also around analytics strategy. Because how can you have multi-channel strategy, integrated, seamless experience, real-time interactions without relying on data? So that provided me a good foundation for both the data strategy as well as kind of how do you think about kind of analytics. And then after moving to the industry, it's been about kind of learning on the job. And there's so many use cases, business needs, business questions that necessitate kind of continuously using data, continuously looking for how do I take this new piece of data, this new kind of capability that's available, and incorporate that into my day-to-day work and help make some good decisions.
This episode of Beyond the Shelf is brought to you by It's Rapid. It's Rapid is the platform Pepsi, Mondelez, Instacart, and hundreds of other leading brands and retailers use to build personalized content at scale. Whether that's images, videos, or product descriptions for their product detail pages, shoppable videos or banners for their digital ad campaigns, or sell sheets for sales enablement, brands that use It's Rapid are able to produce high-quality, on-brand content on average more than 80% faster than category competitors. To find out more, please visit itsrapid.ai.
It's great. Very inspiring. I want to switch gears and talk about retail media. A lot of conversation about that, a lot of investment in that area. How are you thinking about investments and strategy when it comes to retail media?
Yeah, I mean, retail media is no longer optional, right? Similar to kind of we talked about like investing in online business, like retail media is if you're dealing with a channel that's like pure play e-commerce, it's core part of the strategy, right? And it's maturing every year. There's investment in the space, more and more brands are participating, so it's not really a conversation of kind of should we be doing it. It's really about kind of keeping up. Embracing the new capabilities, the new kinds of options that you have available, and then incorporating those learnings and insights back into the strategy. And I guess ensuring that we leverage all the available capabilities, like starting from like keyword-based ads to like streaming TV to get visibility as well as kind of mind share with the consumer. But at the same time, you have to keep efficiency central to that plan because there's more competition, there's more, the nature is becoming more, a little more expensive, right? So you have to continuously drive efficiency as well, and then set aside some kind of focused dollars as well as attention to kind of test and learn, to look for the next, the emerging capabilities. And one thing that's also very interesting problem for me is kind of how does retail media work in tandem with other ways of driving traffic? There's attempts to kind of answer that question. But that's where you start seeing like the overall kind of how does the overall messaging and communication with the consumer through various formats really come together.
It's a great insight and a great point you're making there that because these categories are becoming more competitive, you have to be more efficient in how you're operating and using your investment in the categories.
Mm-hmm.
And then the test and learns, of course, I love that and seeing these new capabilities brought in. Now, we kind of talked about top of funnel a little bit or alluded to it with retail media. You've also got the digital shelf. What are we seeing there? What are you seeing there that's different, best practices, things that are moving the needle?
Before best practices, I think digital shelf tracking is just essential, right? Like you have to see how your brand and your products are presenting in the online channel within the category against competition, because that's really foundational. Now, in terms of some of the best practices, I think automation is really important. You can have your digital shelf tracking. You know what to address, but it's hard to do that manually. And if you have a large catalog, multiple categories, so how do you automate really the actions And they are more of an ongoing nature, right? You always have to be addressing something. And I think that is something that probably is essential versus having a tool to track the digital shelf, knowing what is the issue, what you need to address, but then not having the bandwidth to take actions. I think those are some of the things that have to think hand in hand.
I want to zoom out for a moment, and really had some amazing experiences, some great organizations you've worked with. What are some of your learnings from these different roles that you've had? I know it's hard to sum them up into a couple takeaways, but any insights you can share with us?
Yeah, for sure. I think the learning sort of boil down to some very foundational things. Like, for example, many of my roles have been around kind of setting the strategy or kind of the long term planning as well as driving execution. It's always been a combination of those two. And I think when it comes to setting the strategy, it's really important to have like a long term view and also a more comprehensive thinking. Like, don't leave operations behind while focusing on marketing if you're talking about like revenue growth. Both have to work together and have enough detail behind the strategy. So it's actionable strategy, right? And then measurement and tweaking is really important. It has to happen on an ongoing basis. And the other thing is that it's important not to get stuck on anything and just be open to change. And just because you decided something a year ago, if it's no longer applicable, it's totally okay to kind of move on and completely revisit that approach. And it holds true for like e-commerce practitioners for their success, but also like cross-functional stakeholders and leadership. That success comes from being open to building and changing versus kind of trying to force fit some existing frameworks or frameworks from a different space into e-commerce because it's totally different. It's totally new.
Yeah.
And then there is just always thinking about the core elements, right, of people, process, technology, like having the right team, the right skill set and structure, the right tool set. But then you got to have the processes that really enable the first two. And I think those learnings are really common to any setting. Yeah.
You mentioned this word learning, and it's so clear that you're a natural learner, and so just like so curious and excited to find things that work. Move on if it didn't work, try out this new thing, which is amazing. How do you keep this inspiration to keep learning?
I think it's been easier because I've always been drawn to like new information, like from childhood. So it's more about if it's new information, I immediately kind of get interested, and there's plenty of that in e-commerce, right? So it definitely helps. There's no dearth, and there's so many avenues to learn too, and they're really like easily accessible avenues like articles and podcasts and events and virtual communities and people sharing their knowledge on LinkedIn, and of course your day-to-day job, because you're always asking questions,
Right.
And diving into the data and learning from the team and the partners. So all of that kind of naturally enables learning. And one thing I do love learning, the way I love learning is that I learn from team members also a lot because they are close to the business in a way that I'm not. And then we have team members who connect with like social channels in a deeper manner that I haven't been used to. So it's really fun learning. So I think it boils down to curiosity. And if you have that, there's plenty happening in e-commerce all around to keep you engaged and learning. And like I'm headed to Shop Talk in March, and I'm really excited about that. So like lots of opportunity to learn about what's up and coming and having conversations with fellow practitioners. So yeah.
Let me know. We'll be there with my It's Rapid hat on at Shop Talk. So would love to catch up there. Another macro question for you. We talked kind of about learning on the personal front. If you think about the market and this D2C opportunity more broadly, how are you thinking about that? And what's exciting there? You had this report that you mentioned a while back from eMarketer. You had some interesting stats. What should we be looking out for when it comes to D2C?
Yeah, for sure. And I remember that one. Yeah, that was a data point about kind of e-commerce share plateauing at a certain percentage. And I think it was interesting. And, you'd always see those kind of trends and how the data lands. But I think it's less to do with like bothering about what percentage of sales it is and thinking, where's your consumer? Where's your customer? How are they engaging? How are they buying? And is that kind of that trend sort of progressive? It's not a fad. It's something that's naturally just happening and shifting, and then building your whole strategy around it. So instead of thinking about, okay, it's this percentage of sales, and therefore, no, it's really about working back from the consumer is always more scalable, sustainable way of operating. And it really depends on the category too. Like some categories have a greater share of e-com, and some categories, like physical retail is still important, like grocery, but then it's really growing. And then there's this in between of BOPIS, right? So from a DTC, I think it's really about thinking back from the consumer, and the fundamentals, right? They always matter.
Yeah.
Now, if I was talking about, let's say, DTC in terms of like the channel, from a channel perspective, like the owned and operated channel, right? For us, the question is, it's the why for the consumer. Why would the customer come to our site versus just go buy from another big retailer where they have a membership and get free shipping, etc.? So you have to provide parity in terms of features, some experiences to the extent. But then you have to make it worthwhile for the consumer in terms of what else are you offering. The unique value proposition, it could be educational content, exclusive assortment, first to market, and then, of course, rewarding loyalty and repeat purchases. So it's really about evaluating yourself hard, your own product, your category, your business, understanding your consumer, and then building and executing on that strategy.
So if I can play back to you what you said, it's start with the consumer, and it'll all go from there.
Always, yes.
All right. I love it. We've covered so many great topics today. I have a couple of wrap-up questions for you. The first of which is, what are you reading? What are you listening to in terms of podcasts or books?
Sure. Yeah. So the one I'm reading right now is actually, it's a old, like it's called Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. It's a well-known work, and it's like the learnings are classic in nature, right? There's advice for the large incumbent companies on how to avoid being disrupted by, again, focusing on the right customers, not necessarily on what's existing customers and resources, and then run and reward this innovation differently than the core business. And in that regard, there's a lot of like similarity between how I think organizations should look at e-commerce, especially if the core operating model has been retail centric. So that's really interesting. And then if I may, there's a book I recommend a lot. It's geared towards like entrepreneurs. So Scott Belkin's The Messy Middle. And I found it relevant because it deals with the journey of like building and scaling something. And I feel like many e-com practitioners can relate to that within their own organizations and kind of find some learnings there.
These are great. I will check out The Messy Middle and report back. That sounds like a great one. If you do get some time, when you get some time, what are your favorite hobbies outside of work and family?
Yeah, I mean, I have sort of wide-ranging interests that I, dabble in from time to time, but consistently I spend a fair bit of time with my pets, fitness, now out of need.
Yeah.
And then I do read on a regular basis, and I love to get out and travel a couple times a year to just new places that I haven't been before.
Any great destinations on your list?
Strangely, I've never been to London, so I'm checking that off in a couple of weeks.
Well, it's been so great talking to you. If our listeners want to find you online, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, so that's the best way to find me.
Jyoti Malik, it's been great talking with you here on Beyond the Shelf. I learned a ton. As I mentioned, you have a lot of curiosity, which I think really shines through. And this appetite for learning is just so inspiring. So I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and to share all that with our listeners.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Dave. It's been a pleasure.
That's it for this week's episode of Beyond the Shelf. If you enjoy the show, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. It really helps us grow. And feel free to share us with your colleagues so they too can hear weekly perspectives from the brightest minds in e-commerce. You can also check us out on LinkedIn, where we post clips from each episode, share Dave's takes on breaking industry news, and much more. Beyond the Shelf is a production of It's Rapid. Our host is Dave Feinlieb, And our producers are Sean Levy-Ashvili and Jake Musiker. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Beyond the Shelf.